Welcome to the world of the Florida manatee. I'm Roger Reep and I will be your guide. We're going to look at some of the beautiful places that manatees live in Florida. We're going to look at their habits, what they eat, how they sense the world around them, and also we're going to look at how tourists come to Florida and interact with the manatees. Manatees are marine mammals. You can see in this slide some other marine mammals like whales and dolphins, harbor seals and walruses. All marine mammals live in the ocean, but some of them, like manatees, will go into fresh water, and manatees will drink fresh water, and they'll also go to fresh water to eat the aquatic vegetation there and also to keep warm in the winter time. And that's why they congregate in Florida in such large numbers in the winter. Here we see a mother manatee with her calf. Notice the paddle-shaped tail as the calf is swimming. There are some other manatees in the background that are resting underneath them. Now the mother and her calf are coming up to the surface to take a breath of air, and they'll take a breath about every 10 minutes. This calf will stay very close to its mother for about 2 years in order to learn all the ways of being a manatee, where to go for food and warm water, and how to navigate traveling around Florida. Every year, many people come to Crystal River, Florida on the Gulf Coast to see manatees and to be in the water with them. You can see a couple tour boats in the background bringing tourists to interact with the manatees. The tourists in the water are using flotation devices to keep from stirring up the bottom. And you can see a roped off area with some manatees inside of it. This is called a sanctuary. This is a place where manatees can go without being disturbed by anybody being inside with them. Now these tourists are behaving very appropriately around these manatees. You'll notice 2 of the manatees are down on the bottom resting, and we never want to disturb resting manatees. The other manatee, the third one, is swimming, and the tourists are keeping a good distance. You're not supposed to touch a manatee unless it comes up to you and initiates the contact. Otherwise, floating at the surface very quietly, like these tourists are doing, is the right way to be in the water in a respectful way with the manatees. Here we see the beautiful site known as Three Sisters Springs. This is a system of 3 different springs right together, and it attracts large numbers of manatees in the winter because the water is warmer. You can also see the tourists like to go in here because the water is so clear, so it's real easy to see manatees in their natural habitat. We've learned a lot about the behavior of manatees by observing how they interact with each other and with the tourists. Here you can see the flipper of the manatee, and watch carefully. You'll notice it has fingernails on it. Manatees have a single calf. The gestation time is about a year, so that's a little bit longer than human gestation time of 9 months. A young manatee will suckle for milk, and the teats are located under the flippers. As you can see, this calf is suckling on its mother. It will quickly learn to eat solid food and travel with her in order to find food. The mother manatee will also teach her calf where to go for warm water and how to navigate the different waterways as it travels throughout Florida. When they need to communicate, Manatees use high-pitched vocalizations, as you'll hear in the following sample. In this way, they can stay in touch with each other as they move about. Manatees eat a wide variety of aquatic vegetation. Some of it grows in fresh water, and some of it grows in the salt water, where we call it seagrasses. This vegetation grows on the bottom, but some parts of it may float to the top surface. Manatees spend many hours per day eating. They're really packing in a lot of food, and this is why they look so big, because they have large digestive systems to process all this food. When you or I eat something, it takes a day or two to come out the other end of us. When manatees feed, it takes about a week, so they're really spending a lot of time extracting the maximum amount of nutrition they can. Manatees usually have a plentiful food supply, and they don't have any predators that are trying to chase them down and eat them. So this is part of why they have such a relaxed lifestyle. Now we're going to watch manatees feeding and how they use their mouth parts in a very interesting way. We filmed a manatee through a piece of plexiglass that has holes in it, and we placed pieces of plants in the holes. So we'll look at the manatee twice. Notice how it's using the muscular parts of its mouth and these very stout bristles that we see on the face as it's feeding. It's grasping the food with those bristles that are on the upper lip. Now next we're going to watch the dugong. The dugong is a cousin of the manatee that lives in the area around Australia. It has a similar motion, but you can see the face looks a little different, and yet it's grasping the food with those bristles and using all that facial musculature to bring the food into the mouth. Now, these bristles that the manatees have on their face, they use to grasp anything, not just food items. Here we see a manatee grasping a carrot on the left, and we can easily see the bristles being very actively involved in grasping some kale in the middle. But manatees will also investigate novel objects like an anchor line in the case of the figure on the right. Manatees have these sensory hairs all over the body. This is the only kind of hair they have. And this is different from the hair that you and I have on our arms or our head, which is mostly designed to keep us warm. These hairs are very sensitive to water movement, and that water movement will tell them what's going on in the environment, whether it's another animal nearby, or a tide that's causing the water to move, or a current in the river. This is how they navigate, using these sensory hairs. Now here we can see that the sensory hairs come in three kinds: big ones, little ones, and intermediate ones. You can see the skin surface represented. So the hair follicle is what's hanging down below the skin surface. And as the hair moves around, it bangs into the wall of the hair follicle, and all these little sensory receptors, which are attached to nerves, are excited. And the nerves carry this sensory information about these water movement patterns into the brain. And this kind of information is really crucial to manatees moving around in their environment. Here we see a large number of mammalian brains. The manatee brain is shown by the red arrow, and you can see that it looks different. It's got a smooth surface relative to a lot of the other brains. And this is one of the things we don't really understand. Why is that? What does it mean? These are open questions that scientists are interested in answering. But this is the brain, is where all the sensory information will be processed and used to organize the behavior, like going to look for food. Here's something interesting. A couple years ago at a place called Blue Springs in Florida, a manatee and an alligator became friends. They would visit each other just about every day and have very playful interactions. So this kind of thing was surprising to a lot of us, and it just shows you how much we have to learn about the ways of other animals. Manatees and dugongs are in a group we call the order Sirenia. The Florida manatee you can see at the upper right. To the left of it, the smaller, darker manatee is the South American manatee, which lives in the Amazon River and all of its tributaries. Below the Florida manatee is the West African manatee, which lives in rivers and coastal lagoons of West Africa. To the left of the West African manatee is the dugong that you saw in the feeding video a little earlier. These live in Australia, off the east coast of Africa, and in Indonesia. Now at the bottom is a really interesting animal. You can see it's about twice as long as the Florida manatee. This is called the stellar sea cow. This used to live in the North Pacific Ocean until they were hunted to extinction by sailors in about 1760s. So the only remnant we have of them are museum specimens of various kinds. Here we can see the stellar sea cows in an artist's rendition feeding on kelp beds. And these kelp beds are a type of aquatic vegetation that's found in California today and also up in the Aleutian Islands, which are between the coast of Alaska and the eastern part of Siberia. One of the oldest sirenians that we know about is from fossils that have been discovered that are about 50 million years old. This animal is called Pisosiren, and you can see it looks like a pig sort of creature with 4 legs and a skinny tail, much different than the tail of the modern Florida manatee. Pisosiren probably lived around the edges of shallow ponds and ate the aquatic vegetation that was in those areas. On the right, you can see an artist's rendition of Pisosiren in the water next to a modern-day Florida manatee. So manatees and dugongs have lost the hind limbs that Pisosiren had. Now, over geologic time, in the chart in the upper left, we can see the blue areas represent cooling periods where there were ice ages and glaciers were accumulating. And the yellow areas represent warm periods, which we're currently in one of these warm periods. But you can see how they go back and forth over time. And every time there was a warm period, the fossil record tells us manatees came to Florida. The ones we have now came after the most recent ice age, in other words, about 10,000 years ago. But there were different species of manatees that would come up from the Caribbean, places like Cuba and Puerto Rico, over the years. One of the problems manatees face in Florida is the presence of boats. There's a lot of boats, and some people like to go fast in their boats. When you look at this image here, you can see the yellow arrows are pointing to a surface disturbance of the water that tells you that there's a manatee below there. This is what it looks like when they're swimming just below the surface. So the boat is a danger to the manatee. If it hits the manatee, it can cause serious injuries, or it can even kill the manatee if it's bad enough strike. Now the hull of the boat can hit the manatee, or the propeller or the skeg, as shown in this figure, can also be a source of injuries. So manatees have to be very wary around boats, and if the boats are not going too fast, they can hear them and move out of the way. Every year in Florida, about 25% of the manatee deaths are due to boat strikes. Fortunately, more and more people are aware of the need to go slow in order to avoid hitting manatees. And here we can see in the manatee on the left is showing what scars look like when a manatee gets hit by the propeller of a boat. It makes a series of scar lines. The other manatee has a belt attached to its tail region and a tether with a tracking transmitter on it. And this is how we follow manatee movements, by putting a tag on them and then using a satellite connected to the computer to follow their movements and find out where they go. Periodically, we do manatee health assessments. And what we would do is catch a manatee in a net. You can see all the people doing that on the left. And then for about an hour, we gather different kinds of data. We take blood samples, urine samples, we make measurements, we assess the body condition, the heart rate, all these kind of things. And this doesn't hurt the animal at all. And then sometimes we put a radio transmitter on it. As you can see, the animal on the right is being released back into the water, and the fellow is holding the transmitter, and you can see the belt around the tail. And it's designed to corrode and come off the animal in about 6 months. So this is not harming the animal at all. And we learn a lot about them this way. So I hope you've enjoyed our trip into the world of the Florida manatee. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at the address shown on the slide.